The White Horse, the story of a legend come to life. Inside his sleeping bag, Dan turned, eyes drowsy and body sluggish, wanting only to return to his dreams. Yet, somewhere at the back of his mind, an alarm bell rang. Something had awoken him, a noise that didn't belong. He lay listening to the steady patter of rain on the canvas. Then, from outside the tent, he heard movement and a snort, followed by the soft thump of hooves on damp grass. Sounds a horse would make. Dan tried to imagine what one would be doing up here on its own. In the New Forest or Exmoor, wild horses roamed, but not here, not on the Ridgeway. Curiosity drove him from his warm burrow. He pulled on a pair of jogging trousers and shoes. Outside, thick cloud and rain obscured the moon. And yet, in the pitch-black darkness, a shape shimmered, as if it was not of this world. A white horse, the like of which he'd never seen in his 29 years of life. "I'll be damned," he said softly. His eyes drank in the ethereal form, unable to break away. A brief thought flitted through his head. He should wake Jen. If he told her of this in the morning, she would be angry to have missed it. But any recollection of Jen faded in his mind as the horse took a few steps closer. Spellbound, he watched raindrops running off its mane. This was no ghost. It was real, and it was the most exquisite and regal creature he'd ever laid eyes upon. A burning need overcame him to touch its silvery white robe. Heart fluttering, he inched towards it. The horse flicked its head upwards and turned away, as though it expected Dan to follow. "What am I doing?" he muttered, as he trailed after it along the chalk track. It turned into an open gate, leaving the main path to head towards one of the barrow mounds. Still Dan followed. The horse was special, he told himself. He couldn't let it disappear into the shadows and risk never seeing it again. He and Jen had arrived late in the evening. They decided to visit the barrow early morning, hoping the rain would have stopped. But here he was, alone in the dead of night, seeing his first glimpse of the ancient tomb by the horse's otherworldly glow. The soft rain was warm against Dan's skin, as though his body had an internal heat. He didn't know what was happening here, but it filled him with awe. The magnificent beast ambled towards the burial mound. At the entrance, a stone lintel was supported by vertical pillars to each side. A man would need to crouch to enter. And yet, as the horse approached, it sank down, as if it could pass through stone and grass and soil. In Dan's heart, no fear existed, only a sort of love. He'd never felt anything so powerful. Without any thought of what he was about to do, he stepped into the light cast by the horse and began the descent into the tomb. "Wouldn't go in there if I were you," a voice said from nearby. It was an old voice, ravaged by time. Dan paused and lifted his head to see a cloaked figure to the right of the tomb. "It's returning home," the man said, "and that can't be a place for the living." Anger rose in Dan's chest. Who was this man to stop him? He couldn't be feeling what Dan felt. "I have to follow it." The words came out awkwardly, as if they stuck in his throat. "The horse is a god, and many a man has entered that tomb never to return. Is that what you want?" A memory of the tent and the sleeping bag, with Jen inside, came to Dan. Did he care so little for her? They were supposed to be getting married. What was this madness? He pulled a hand through his wet hair and was suddenly aware of how cold he'd become, as though the warmth he'd felt before had suddenly deserted him. He shivered and watched the last signs of the horse god vanishing beneath the ground. His gaze returned to the man in the cloak, or at least to where he had stood, for he was no longer there. Only the tomb and the rain and the darkness remained. Dan trudged back to the main path, knowing he'd made the right decision. So why did he feel this sense of loss? And yet, that light still existed in his mind's eye. He didn't think it would ever leave him. Back in the tent, Jen hadn't moved. The steady sound of her breathing was reassuring. He dried himself off as best he could and crawled back into his sleeping bag. He recalled her telling of a great white horse further along the path, one made from chalk. It had been etched into the landscape centuries ago, or so it was said. Jan had laughed about it. Fancy doing all that work to make a drawing on a hill. Now he thought he understood. Maybe they'd seen what he'd seen and felt the love he'd felt. Tomorrow, he whispered to the night, we'll go and see their white horse. The White Horse at Uffington in the UK measures a colossal 360 feet in length. While no one is certain of its ancient origins, some think it may have connections with Epona, the goddess of horses that was worshipped by the Celts.